setting up.
I've been working through the book of Ecclesiastes. One of the things I'm trying to do is to work through English Bible, of course, from the Hebrew text, but not doing grammar, a lot of grammar, mainly looking at the thought. It's almost like a running commentary. And so we worked our way through Ecclesiastes, and now we're at actually the end of chapter 4, verses 13 to 16. We've looked at the introduction and how that the Kohelet says all things are vain and vanity in chapter 1, the first 11 verses. We saw the vanity of human wisdom in chapter 1 as well, because that which is lacking cannot be numbered. You have 7, you need 3 to get to 10, but you can't find it. Then, so there's a sadness. There is the vanity of materialism and pleasure. All of this proves to be futile and fleeting. That's in chapter 2, 1 to 11. Then we looked at the vanity, we looked at the fact that wisdom is better than folly, but both people die, whether you're wise or foolish. The reality of death haunts every human being. Then Kohelet says, in light of this, enjoy life in your toil. And one of the things we need to keep reminding ourselves is we need to enjoy life in the midst of our working and life's toil. Some people just work and they can never seemingly enjoy life. Next, there's a time for everything under the sun. And we talked about all of that. And in the midst of that, God creates this time. And so again, enjoy life. He talks about the unrighteousness that often is in the place where you would expect judgment that would be wise and a just judgment. And so he's observing that. That's all in chapter 3. Then in chapter 4, 1 to 3, he looked at all the oppressions that are done under the sun and how, as we look at all of these oppressions, how do we deal with life in the midst of that? And then he talks about the balance between work and rest. This is in chapter 4, verses 4 to 6. We need to have one handful of toil and one handful of rest, that beautiful balance. Then he talked about the value of friendship in chapter 4, verses 9 to 12. 2 are better than 1, because if one falls, the other can help lift him up. And even 3 is better yet, a threefold cord. Then, remember, he talks about, as we're coming now, to the vanity of popularity. People often think, I'm going to leave a legacy of popularity that will go on and never be forgotten. The reality is everyone will be forgotten in this world. And so the vanity of popularity in and of itself does not bring fulfillment. Thank God for a believer in Jesus. We're told our toil is not in vain, though, in the Lord. So as we go on to chapter 4, verses 13 to 16, notice what he says about how popularity in and for itself is vanity. Better is a poor and wise child than an old and foolish king, who will no more be admonished. For out of prison he comes to reign, whereas also he that is born in his kingdom becomes poor. I considered all the living which walk under the sun, with the second child that shall stand up in his stead. And there is no end of all the people, even of all that have been before them. They also that come after shall not rejoice in him, that is, in the recent child or king. Surely this also is hevel, vanity, and the vexation of the spirit. Better is a poor and wise child, he begins in these verses, a child that does not have the advantage of popularity as a king, than an old and foolish king who does not know how to receive admonishment anymore. The admonishment he is talking about is that he is steeped in folly, thinking he has this royal and kingly popularity. He goes on to say, for out of prison he came forth to be a king, even though in his kingdom he was born poor. He is looking then at a situation where a king came out of nowhere. He was literally unknown from bad circumstances. Though he came from this environment, he ends up becoming a king, although he was born poor in his kingdom. And the Kohelet says, I saw all the living who walk under the sun, that they are with the second child that was to stand in his stead. Somebody else replaces him, and he's no more the popular king. This king, while he had momentary popularity, lost it. And there was a younger one that came on the scene, and all of the people then turned to him. This is like what is happening, we could say, between David and Absalom. This child that has now become king stood in the first king's place. And there is no end of all the people, even all of those that were before them, doing the same thing. In other words, this has been going on since the beginning of time. Indeed, they that come after shall not rejoice in the second king. I understand this, hence to refer to this second king, the child who was to become a king. Those who come on the scene later, though, will not rejoice in him either. Indeed, the Kohelet says, this is hevel, vanity, and a striving after the wind. To think that your popularity will continue indefinitely is very wrong, because everyone is soon forgotten, the Kohelet is saying. The first king came out of nowhere and became very popular with people who were rejoicing over him, at least for a little while. Then there is a second king who comes on the scene, who was a child at the time of the kingship of the first, and the people then turn and rejoice in him. This has been going on forever, time immemorial, the Kohelet says. Even this young one, though, will experience the same thing eventually. They will not continue, that is, people, to rejoice in him either. This is vanity. When you think about people working for 40, 50 years, and then they retire, and maybe they sing a song for he's a jolly good fellow, and give him a belt buckle, and that's it. All of those years is now gone, at least as far as his popularity. So if we think popularity is going to continue, the Kohelet is saying that that will just not happen. We see this, for example, in politics. People can come on the scene and for a moment be very popular, but that wears out, and some younger person comes on the scene and is very popular, and even that then changes. So basically, what he is saying is that if you bank on popularity, that is foolish. That is the problem with the old king that cannot be admonished. I think this is true in all of life. As a pastor, for example, I've experienced all the variety of different churches. One can come to a church and you can have a honeymoon with the church for a while. Perhaps some people will claim they have a wonderful experience the whole time. But often at the beginning, it works like this. Everyone is all excited about the new pastor. They may have a party and everything is great. Then after time, there are still those who love the ministry, but there are many who are not as they were at the beginning, not as excited about the new pastor that had come on the scene. They think, well, this new pastor, when it first happens, will be able to endure for a long, long time. The same thing will happen, though, to everyone that goes through this experience, whether it's pastoring, teaching, or whatever job one is involved in. There will be some then who are not enamored always, and the popularity will fade away. And so he's observing what happens. It's sort of like Shakespeare said, and we referred to this at the beginning. Life is like a stage. We come on the stage, we do our part, and then we go off the stage and new actors come on. I think this is true with everyone, every human being. If they live long enough, will experience all of this. And so I think we're seeing great wisdom in what the Kohelet is saying. But one of the things that I alluded to at the beginning is we can know that our toil is not in vain in the Lord, in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And so may we labor, as Jesus said, for the bread that never perishes, and that is for the Lord's approval, that he would say, well done, good and faithful servant. And we can know that that approval will never, ever go away. I remember a story that I heard of a missionary who had given his life serving the Lord on a particular mission as a missionary that he had done. And he was coming home, and he was on the ship at that time of the president who had gone for a hunting trip. And when he got off of the ship, we're told that throngs of people were there to meet the president, who had just come back from a hunting expedition. When the missionary who had given his life came off the ship, not one person was there to meet him. And the person that was to pick him up evidently was late. So as he got off, he felt very sad. And he said, you know, I spent my life. And this other person, the president, had just gone on a hunting trip. And there were thousands, throngs of people to meet him. And he felt down. He felt discouraged. But on the way out of that ship, the Holy Spirit spoke to him and said, sir, just remember, you're not home yet. And one of the things that we must always remind ourselves is that we're not home yet, and we need to be faithful, knowing that the Lord's all-seeing eye is watching, and he will reward everyone according to their faithfulness and their fidelity to him. It's required of a steward that he or she be found faithful, not what we call successful, or popular in this world.